Hi, my name is Rohan Gupta. I am working with the IIT Madras Alumni Association as a program manager. It's my immense pleasure to welcome you all to session two of IIT Madras's Photography Club. It's also my honor to introduce Sridhar Bhuvaraghavan, the president of IIT Madras's Alumni Association and an incredible photo enthusiast who will also be leading session three to introduce today's session and our instructor. Over to you, Sridhar.
Thank you so much, Rohan. It's this initiative of ours to find interest-based groups in service of our prime objective, which is to increase alumni engagement, has been extremely successful. There have been a lot of people who've showed a lot of interest and are also starting to participate in looking at other people's photographs, asking them, why did you do this? Why did you do that? To basically serve for the learning of how to do certain things and how we titled this workshop that is spread over like 6 sessions is that how can you gain control over what the camera does for you, right? So typically the camera does think very nicely for you. It takes very good photographs, and cameras have been improving quite a lot over the ages, and nowadays it almost always does or gives you a right photograph. But knowing the science behind how it chooses these things, and sometimes knowing how to override what it thinks is the right photograph, is what these series of sessions is about. And believe me, after you learn like how it is doing, what you want from a particular photograph, I promise you, you will never go back to auto anymore. So that is the theme of our session, to move you away from auto by learning these settings. What do they mean? Why they should be used in what context? And we have two other excellent instructors. If you've missed session one by Samyukt Sridharan, please go and take a look at YouTube sessions there, and you will see an overview of what we are going to do. And today we have an incredible photographer whose photography I personally have seen over the years because he happens to be a cousin of mine as well. An incredibly talented, patient, and gifted photographer who you will see talking about the exposure triangle today. Take it away, Praveen. Thank you.
Thanks, Sridhar. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to session two of Mastering Digital Photography, organized by the IIT Madras Alumni Association Photography Club. My name is Praveen Ramanathan, and I'll be an instructor today. Here is a brief overview of what we'll be talking about in this session. We'll have a very quick recap of the exposure triangle, and then we'll do a deep dive into aperture, which I feel is the most interesting component of the triangle. We had originally planned to include shutter speed and ISO, but then looking at the material that we wanted to cover and how much of information there is about each one of them, we decided to spin them off to another session next week so that we can get sufficient time to show you a live demo and also answer some of your questions. Right. So followed by that, we'll also have a quick live demo and then a few creative suggestions followed by Q&A. So I graduated in 2006 from the electrical engineering department. I did my master's from the University of Texas at Austin, and since then have been a techie in the Bay Area. I am primarily a landscape photographer first, but I've been exploring portrait and event photography in the past few years. For the longest time, I've been a Nikon fan. My first DSLR was the D80, followed by the D7000, and then I moved on to full frame for landscape photography with the D600, that I used for the longest time. And then when Nikon came up with their first mirrorless camera, I pre-ordered their Z6, which is an excellent hybrid camera. But then you can say I got attracted to the dark side, and I've been using the Sony A7R system for the past couple of years now. So through the course of my photography journey, I have owned many lenses ranging from 11mm cropped all the way to 600mm. But my favorite lens is the 24-70 f2.8. It's my go-to lens for portrait and landscapes, and my favorite place to shoot is Yosemite. All right, a quick recap, enough about me, but let's talk about photography now. A quick recap, in session 1, Samyukt did a fantastic job providing an overview of the various technical aspects of the DSLR camera, various components, what goes into the camera itself. And I would highly recommend you watch it on YouTube. We have a copy of the YouTube live session in case you missed the first session. One of the aspects that was touched upon is the exposure triangle, right? So the exposure triangle is a fundamental concept in photography that describes how the three settings, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, work together to control the amount of light that reaches the sensor, thus determining the exposure, the final image's exposure, right? So the aperture is the physical opening in the lens that lets the light in. The larger the opening, the more light it lets in, right? Shutter is the part of the camera that controls how much time the light falls on the sensor. So slower the shutter speed, the more light it lets in, right? ISO is actually an electrical setting, not really a physical one, that controls how sensitive your sensor becomes to light, which means higher the ISO, brighter the image. But you have to pay for that brightness with more noisy or grainy pictures, right? So the reason these three settings are shown as a triangle is because adjusting one setting requires a change in at least one of the others to maintain the correct exposure, right? For example, if you are letting in a lot more light by making your aperture larger, you might need to lower your shutter speed, otherwise the image might get overexposed. Same thing if you are if you make the aperture smaller, you might need to let the shutter speed remain open for a longer period of time to get the same exposure, right? But each of these settings also has a creative effect on the image, such as depth of field for aperture, motion blur for shutter speed, and so on. So, excuse me. So in today's session, I'll talk about aperture and how to use it in all different ways. So aperture, as I said, is the physical opening of the lens that lets the light in, right? Since openings are circular, the lens is circular, the light entering the camera is actually proportional to the area of the opening of the circle, the area of the hole. So apertures are measured in what is called an F number, where F stands for focal. F number is nothing but a ratio of the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the aperture, right? So since the F number is inversely proportional to the aperture's diameter, small f number means larger aperture. So let's say we have a lens whose focal length is 50 millimeters. When the diameter of the aperture is about 18 millimeter, give or take, it has a corresponding area of about 256 millimeters square. So the F number for this particular combination is about 2.8. But now let's say you half the area from 256 to 128 millimeters square, the radius and the diameter actually reduces by the square root of 2, because its area is pi r squared, right? And because the f number is inversely proportional to the diameter, the f number actually increases in steps of the square root of 2, which is why you, if, let's say the f number starts with 1, the true, what we call the true f number, not the interpolated, extrapolated numbers. The true f numbers are usually 1, 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, and then 32 for in many lenses. You'll find something maybe a little bit more than this as well. But that's the basic, basically how the f number concept came up as. So, and if you look at your lens, you will see that you will they will only annotate these true f numbers starting from your lowest number to the highest that your lens can take it. So what it means is that f2.8 can let in twice as much light as f4, even though the f number is only different apart by square root of 2. The area of the aperture is actually twice as large in f2.8. So so f2.8 lets in twice as much as light as f4, which is what we photographers call as a whole stop of light. So whenever you double your light or half your light, half the exposure, it's called a stop. So if you look between f1 to f22, it's about 512 times brighter for the same shutter speed and everything. So f1 will let in almost 500 times more light than f22. So before I move to depth of focus, I want to show you, I have a couple of lenses here. Okay, I had to unblur my background so that Zoom can show you two lenses. So here I have two lenses. Both of them are 70 to 200. The bigger one and the bulkier one is f2.8. It goes up to f2.8, fixed aperture at both 70 millimeters and 200 millimeters. And the one I have right next to it is the f4, 70 to 200, exact same focal length range, but it only goes to f4. So you can see that anything with a larger aperture or a smaller f number requires a bigger hole, which means it is you need the lens is bigger and bulkier than a lens with a smaller f number. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's the hole of the f2.8, and that is the hole of f4, right? So that's the f4 versus f2.8 difference, and you can see it makes a difference in the hole, in the opening, and then it also makes a difference in the size of the camera, because you note that the f number is a ratio of your focal length to the diameter of the lens, right? So which means that it's 200 mm for both, but then this is f4, this is f2.8. f2.8 requires a bigger opening. So your lenses, so this is why your what we call faster lenses, the lenses that are with a bigger opening are referred to as faster lenses. They are more expensive, more bulkier, more bigger. That's because of the physics involved in it. All right, let's get back to the presentation. Okay, so another thing that aperture gives us is the size of the aperture actually dictates how much of the image is actually in focus. And since photographs are like two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional space, this corresponds to the depth as seen by the camera, and hence this is referred to as the depth of focus or depth of field sometimes. So there are two different ways of calling this. So when you have a smaller f number, like a f2.8, which means a larger aperture, the light creates a larger angle on the sensor, which narrows down the region that can be in focus. And as the aperture is made smaller and smaller and smaller, the light creates a smaller and smaller angle on the sensor, which allows for a greater depth of the photo to be in focus. It's the nature of light and the laws of physics that makes this happen. And this is how pinhole cameras work. I'm sure some of you might have done something similar during a partial solar eclipse, where you take a piece of paper, you poke a hole in it, and then you just show it, don't look at the sun, and then you show it and you can see the sun's light passing through, and you'll be able to see the eclipse happening on the other end, right? This is the same concept, right? So what this means is that the smaller the f number, this f2.8, shallower the depth of focus, and larger the f number, greater or wider the depth of focus. So, so should you always use the largest f number that your lens allows? Probably not, right? So as the aperture gets smaller and smaller, the image actually gets affected by another phenomenon called diffraction, which is nothing but light on the edges getting scattered. So images shot at very large f numbers, typically in the f22 or sometimes even f16 and larger. So f22 or larger is usually the ones that you can see, but even some depends on the quality of the lens. But even f16 sometimes is not sharp, and we will see an example of such an image. I'll show you that. But for illustration purposes, you can see the image on the right that's taken at the one that's taken at f32 is noticeably softer. So it's not that it's out of focus, it is actually soft. That's how we say in photography, the image is not sharp, right? There's two things, there's images sharp versus image being focused. There's two different things. So as you stop down the aperture, as the f number goes up, the image actually becomes softer, and you'll start noticing it. Your eye will start noticing it after a certain. It's not that it's not happening in other f numbers. It's happening a lot less. But as you go up, then the f number, you will see that it's happening. But in macro photography, you usually deal with tiny objects, and even the smallest, even the largest, even the smallest aperture like f22 or f32 will not give you the greatest depth of focus. But that's where you resort to techniques like focus stacking for that. The softness will be more pronounced in landscape photographs because landscape you shoot at larger f numbers. So there are different schools of thoughts about using these large f numbers. Some will say you have to avoid anything above f16. It's up to you what you want to do it, but it's important to know the limits of your lenses to achieve what you want to do. Sometimes you might be forced to use a very small aperture, but know the limits of your lenses before, so you understand the quality of the image. Don't be surprised by the quality of the image later on. Just let's quickly look at smartphones camera's aperture. Most of the smartphone camera lenses right now have a fixed aperture. Only a few smartphones that have been launched this year have a variable aperture. I believe Xiaomi has one, and you will see more of these variable aperture sensors coming up in the next few years. Samyukt went over how to read the EXIF of a photo in session 1. EXIFs of photos taken on smartphones, like let's say the iPhone 17 Pro, will actually show the aperture to be something like f1.78. That's amazing, right? But then you wonder, why does it have to use computational photography to add a depth of or blur the background? That's because the advertised aperture needs to be scaled to the full frame equivalent in order to compare oranges to oranges. I don't want to say apple to apple. So for example, the iPhone advertises its main camera's focal length as 24 millimeters, while its true focal length is closer to about 6.767 millimeters. So if you scale the aperture for the true focal length and the size of the sensor, its true aperture is somewhere between f5.6 and 6.3. And note that this is a high-end camera, a high-end phone with a very high-end camera, right? So this means the lower-end cameras have true apertures closer to f7.1 or f8, right? So that's why smartphones need computational photography in order to produce the background blur that many of us are now used to, right? But they're also affected by diffraction, which is why the images are almost always pretty soft, and then they need algorithms and software to sharpen those. Okay. Here are two images taken with different apertures to demonstrate how the aperture affects the depth of focus. The one on the left was taken at f5, and the one on the right was taken at f11. Note that the one with f5 was taken at 1/200th of a second, whereas the one on the right, which is f11, was 1/40th of a second. So this is where I was saying that the shutter speed and aperture are in a kind of tug of war if you want to keep the exposure the same. You can see how the one on the left, where you have a smaller f number, larger aperture, the background is a little bit more blurred. The flowers in the background are blurred. The grass is blurred, both in the foreground and the background. Whereas on the right image, things are a little bit more in focus. They're not completely in focus because we didn't step down all the way, which means we didn't reduce the aperture all the way, and the subjects were also pretty close. But you can see that there is definitely a little bit more clarity in focus in what you see. So here is another picture demonstrating how an aperture of f2.8 really helps separate the subject from the background, right? But if you're taking pictures of the group of let's say you have many people that you want to take, it's recommended to increase your f number closer to f8. Depends on a lot of other factors as well, the size of the group, how far you are, and so on. But does that mean that you have to always use an f number whenever you're photographing a group of people? Not really, no, right? The distance of your subjects from the camera also makes a big difference, right? So if your subjects are sufficiently far away, you can actually lower your f number. You can manage with a lower f number, right? So here is an example of a group photo of an event taken, and you can see that this was taken at f3.2, which is again, so note that f3.2 is not a true f number. It is something that your camera and lens interpolates between. It's a smaller step than the others. So here is a photo that was taken. This was I think closer to between 70 and 200. I was very far away. So you can see that the others, quite a few people are, even though there is a difference in distance and depth, you can see that they're in pretty much decent focus, and also the backdrop is pretty clear as well. So here is an interesting set of images. The one on the left was shot at f11, and the one on the right was shot at f22. Right, the smallest aperture that my lens could handle. The shutter speed is almost the same between the two photos, but the photo on the right has been processed to match the exposure of the photo on the left. So that's why you don't see a big difference. There was also a slight change in the position of my graduated neutral density. filter for the right photo, which kind of affected how the trees in the middle look a little bit different, but they're pretty much the same spot and same place. Now, at first glance, both these pictures look amazing, right?
Praveen, sorry to interrupt you. Just a heads up that we have 30 minutes left.
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. Yeah, so these pictures to the naked eye, when you're zooming out and looking at it, looks incredible. I mean, they looks the same, right? Wrong. If you look closer, you will see the difference. When you zoom in to the photo, you will see that the photo on the right that was taken at f22 has noticeably less sharper lines in the rocks. You can see the highlighted, the ones that I've circled. So notice the lines on the rocks and the highlighted spots there. So the one on the left was taken at f11, and the one on the right was taken at f22. And you can see here the rock in the middle of the water is a lot sharper in f11 than at f22. And this is nothing. This was taken on a tripod. Obviously, it's a 13-second exposure, 15-second exposure. There is no camera shake involved here. It's purely physics. It's purely diffraction that is making the image on the right softer than the image on the left. Note that the image is actually in focus. There's nothing wrong with the focus. It's just that, and this is a beginner's mistake. I've done this in the past. I know a lot of people who do it right now, but this is a beginner's mistake of always stopping down to the smallest aperture thinking that you will get the best image quality. Right. Another thing that aperture gives us is background blur that really enhances portraits. Bokeh or bokeh is the word that is used by photographers to describe this blur. It's derived from the Japanese word bokeh or bokeh, which means, again, it means blur or haze, right? So the quality of blur depends on the optical quality and the design of the lens itself. And of course the diaphragm blades that go into the construction of the lens, right? So the number and the shape of the blades determines how round and nice the bokeh show up, right? So you can see on the right there are bokehs from a few different cameras that I found online, and depending on how many blades and also the aperture size, the bokeh size and the shape kind of way, right? So the easiest way to get a nice bokeh is to lower your f number. That means you make your aperture as large as you can on your camera. But the most important thing is use a long focal length and try to see if there is you can make a separation between your subject and the background. And we'll go over a live demo of this today as well, right? Now, bokeh is also important in wildlife photography or in any photography where you want the subject or the animal or the bird to stand out from the background, to have a separation from the background as well. So there are different applications, not just for portraits, but in other places as well, where you use the background blur. All right, so we'll jump to a live demo. All right. I hope the tether is coming through.
Looks good, Praveen.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Just a reminder to everyone, if you want to ask a question, please post in the chat box and we'll get to it towards the end of the session. Thank you. Praveen, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So here I have two subjects. I have a doll in the foreground, and then there is a mammoth in the background, and so I want to demonstrate how changing the aperture changes the depth of field. So right now the aperture, this is a 24 to 70 f2.8 lens mounted on the camera. and right now it is set at f2.8, which is highlighted over here on the right here. So and you can see the image, the doll is very sharp, whereas the mammoth, you can't even make out what it says on the background there, right? So as I turn my aperture dial, you can see that the aperture is changing on the right. So it's changed now to f4, to f5, to f5.6. So why don't we let's take a picture first here at f2. This is f2.8. Okay, all right. So now let's take a picture and let's increase the f number to, let's say, f11, and you can kind of make out that the letters in the background is kind of starting to show up a little bit more. But what you also notice is that when you change the f number, the aperture, the shutter speed changes because I have the camera in the aperture priority mode. So on your camera, if you have it with you, it'll either say A or AV on your camera. So that's the mode I have, so I can control the aperture, and the camera automatically sets the shutter speed that it thinks is appropriate for this lighting situation. So at f2.8, if you notice, at f2.8, the camera said I needed the shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, but if I stop it down to f11, it says I need about 1/8 of a second. So I'm going to take a picture here, and then I'm going to continue going all the way to f22. You know, f22 is the smallest aperture that I can get on my lens, and the shutter speed right now is at half a second. Okay, so we took, and now you can see at f22, the mammoth, you can actually see what it says in the background, and then you can see what it is doing, right? So that's what aperture helps with maintaining or making the depth of field. That's a cool part of aperture. Now, let's say I add a light source or a light something in the background. I'm just using something that can reflect some light here and set something. So I want to demonstrate bokeh here. So you can see when I am at f2.8, you see a nice round balls of light showing up in the background. That is bokeh. That's what we talked about. That's the background blur that most of us are used to, and sometimes we like to see this in the images as well, especially in portrait photography. There is it makes the background look very nice. So you can see how the aperture at f2.8, and this is my maximum focal length, right? Now if I zoom out and then refocus, let me focus here. So you can see if I zoom out, the bokeh is not great because there is not a lot of separation. It's not a lot of separation between the subject and the background, right? But for the same f2.8, I zoom in and then I just focus back here. You can see that it creates a nice round bokeh. Now at the same focal length, if I stop my aperture down to f22, you can see the bokeh is pretty much gone. It's just a reflection of the light or the light source, right? So f2.8, longer focal length will give you the best bokeh, right? So let's take a picture here, and then let's stop the shutter speed, the aperture down to, let's say, f22. Take a picture there. Okay, all right. So now we took a bunch of pictures. Let's look at them even a little bit more closer, right, to understand what happened.
Praveen, sorry if I can interrupt you for a second. There's a very valid question, and I'm looking at this on my screen, so I also want to understand why the bouquets of different colors background. This is from Ramanathan because I'm seeing a little bit of noise in the purple background that you have.
Yeah. So why is there noise? Is that the question?
The question is why are there bouquets of different colors background?
Why are there bouquets of different color background?
Ramanathan, maybe I can request you to unmute. It's maybe it's something that I'm seeing because there's maybe a little bit of noise. Maybe you can show us just
So the noise is, yes, the noise is an artifact of the camera trying to adjust the exposure. So I'm indoors. So what you're seeing is a live transmission of the camera. It is trying to keep an exposure for me because I have this set in the aperture priority, but the ISO is an auto ISO. So as I make the aperture smaller, the camera has to increase the ISO to maintain the same thing beyond a certain.
So there's going to be bound to be some interference, right?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah,
I think
that's why
that
it's just noisy. It's nothing. No, yeah, it's just that it's what the live view shows you right now. Right. Yeah, we can keep the ISO the same and then see what happens, but that is a thing for the next session. So right now that the reason you're seeing the image being, or at least what the live view feed being a little bit more grainy, is because the camera is actually bumping up the ISO to maintain the same exposure. It's trying to balance the exposure triangle. It's saying it can either make the shutter speed like really large if needed, but it's trying to come up with some algorithm to say, okay, I can do this at 0.4 seconds, but I'll bump up the ISO so you can keep the same exposure. That's what is happening. That's why it seems to be a little bit more grainy. I hope that was the question. Okay, so let's quickly look at the pictures here. Right. So, what do I turn on? So the picture on, let's look at this one and this one. Yeah. Okay. So the picture on the left was taken at f2.8, and the picture on the right was taken at f11, and you can see here, if I zoom in, you can see this is the effect of aperture where it blurs the background because at f2.8 it has a very shallow depth of field, whereas when I step it down to f11 you can see that the background is coming to be a little bit more clearer as you progress, right? So this is f2.8 to f11, and then you can do f2.8 versus f22. This is f22, right? So this is and if I just want to show you f11 versus f22, this is f11 on the left versus f22 on the. Now you see that f22 gives you a more depth of field, a wider depth of field, but it is making the image a bit softer. It's not really clear in this images. It's not that you will be able to notice in every single image that f22 is softer, but it's clearly it is softer than f11. What f11 could have been, right? And if I want to look at the bokeh or bokeh, here is the difference, right? So the one on the left is shot at f2.8, and the one on the right is shot at f11 or f22. So you can see how the bokeh pretty much disappears. You see, it's not just the bright light that you can see, but there's also bokeh in the other aspects of the reflection. So there is a slight reflection on the top, there's a small tiny reflection on the bottom, and the bokeh is really enhances the picture. Okay, let me jump back to the presentation.
Again, a heads up, we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, so now we understand how aperture affects the depth of focus and the exposure. Beyond the science and technical details, photography is an art. There are no rigid rules, only recommendations. So let's go over some of the suggested settings that might work in certain situations. Again, these are just recommendations, suggestions to get you thinking about it, but it doesn't mean that you can only do this in this situation or do that in the other situation. So smaller f numbers, typically less than f4, are used for subject separation. Mostly portraits use this a lot, and also in wildlife when you want to separate your animal or bird from the background, it helps a lot. Another application for these smaller apertures is actually astrophotography. When you're shooting very large landscape, star trails, or the Milky Way, it comes in really handy to have a smaller aperture, a smaller f number, which is a larger aperture, because then you can let in more light, and hence you can reduce your ISO. That's a recommendation for that. And then for these medium apertures, I would say about between 5.6 to about 8. You can use it for group portraits where you have many subjects that you want people to be in focus, or you have a landscape that you want a shallow depth of focus. Again, there are gray areas. Wildlife depends. If you're shooting a flock of birds, you want many of them to be in focus, then you have to let the f number be somewhere between 5.6 and 8. Moon photography, I would highly recommend using apertures no bigger than f11, right? Larger f numbers, that's once you go into the double digits, those are the larger f numbers. They are used pretty much for your wide depth of field landscape. And sometimes you also have to stop down to make your aperture smaller when you're capturing waterfalls, when you want those smooth effects. And let's say in a very bright area, you can't reduce your shutter speed by much. The way to do it is to stop down your aperture, make it smaller, so larger f number. Cityscape and even macro photography, you would use larger f numbers, right? Extremely large f numbers gives you extremely good depth of field, but be mindful of diffraction. It's right around the corner. Seriously. So, but there are really good applications for these very large f numbers. So one that I use a lot is to create starburst in light sources. So when you stop down your aperture, when you make the aperture really small, you will notice that the diaphragm blades in your lens come really close, and it creates a kind of a pinhole, and it scatters the light that enters through that small pinhole. So all your light sources would have tiny kind of stars coming out of it, and sometimes it gives a nice effect to the picture that you can see on the right over here. Then of course macro needs an extremely large depth of field. If you don't want to do focus stacking and you're okay with trading off your quality of picture with the amount of work that you need to do, you can go for larger apertures. So these are some of the suggested creative situations for different types of apertures. So this concludes our session. This is what I wanted to cover in this session. Session 2B, which is we will be talking about shutter speed and ISO, continues on next.
Sorry to interrupt you. So yeah, to everyone joining in, we're going to be splitting up session 2 into session 2A, which was today, and session 2B, which will be next Saturday, the 13th, I believe is the date. Yeah, Saturday 13th at the same time. Sorry, Praveen, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll be continuing the session, this particular sessions with more live demonstration, going a little bit deeper into shutter speed, motion blur, and then ISO in the next week, right?
So if you're okay, can we open it up to questions?
Yeah, so I'm going to...
Again, reminder to everyone to post questions in chat. We've got a lot of questions. So Suresh Kumar has asked, diffraction images, slides, water, stones, etc. seem to have been taken in decent light. Why were the times so high, 13 seconds and 15 seconds?
So I really didn't need 13 seconds. The examples that I have, so I shot this picture all the way from 3 seconds to 15 seconds. I was trying different options, and I'm just showing you a demonstration between f11. So but I have it at different f-stops and different things. So a lot of each of those raw images comes out a bit differently. And then post-processing takes care of, I take care of it in post-processing to see which image that I like. So this is more of an experiment that I was doing. I was playing with the setting and trying out different things, but it's nothing to say that why I used 13 seconds, because I had an ND filter, neutral density filter on, which is why I could go to these high. But my goal there was to make the water as silky as possible. So I was, and the only way you can try out is you try out whether it works at 5 seconds. It depends on the flow of water, how far you are, a lot of different things. So I wanted to get this kind of misty, milky image. So I was trying different settings. That's why the exposure times were about 13 seconds.
Great, thank you so much. Ganesh asks an elementary question. Would the difference in image quality between f11 and f22 waterfall picture be perceivable if you print them as a 4:6 photo?
No. Maybe not a 4:6. I'm guessing if you're just talking about printing it on a small postcard, probably not. And depends on the eye as well. Maybe an experienced photographer who pixel peeps even on small pictures may be able to. For my eye, I can actually see the difference for me because I'm probably trained, but an untrained eye may not be able to notice the difference at all between an f11 and an f22 when you are taking a picture on a 4:6. So most of these pictures, which is why even on pictures that you take on your cell phone, when you look at it on your phone cameras, on your phone screen, sorry, it looks really good, but then you bring it up to a print or you look at it on a large monitor, and then you start seeing all these different artifacts, and you see that, oh, this is like, there's a lot of image sharpening, there's a lot of noise, this area is not sharp. So to answer your question, 4:6, you will not notice. Most people will not notice. Only experienced photographers with an eye for it will notice it.
Okay, Ramanathan, who asked the question of bokeh, has also asked, as aperture is reduced, ISO is going up and so is the noise. In recent picture, doll, the horizontal strip of carpet was in focus. Does this mean when we change focus, aperture also changes automatically?
So when we change focus, changing aperture changes focus. So you're not changing focus, you're changing the aperture here. So let me just go back to the doll picture here. So you can see here on the carpet, right? This is the one shot at f2.8 on the left, and then f11 or f22 on the right. So changing the aperture, and you can see only this amount of the focal plane is actually in focus. So which is why you see that plane of the carpet is in focus, right? So changing the aperture changes focus, not the other way around. So if I can focus on the mammoth, but it will keep my aperture the same. It just shifts. It just moves the focal plane. So with so you can change the focusing distance if it makes sense, right?
I hope that answers
So
your question, Ramanathan.
yeah.
Our last question is Naveen Lamba, who asks, is there a good software that allows us to play around with f number, shutter speed, etc., and see the effect of the image like what you are using for the demo?
So it depends on your camera. This is from a Sony camera, so this is a Sony thing. But there are so what you need to do is you just take pictures on your camera by changing the settings. So today we talked about the aperture priority setting, right, where you control the aperture and then the camera automatically sets the ISO and the shutter speed, right? So you're not thinking about all the three things in the triangle. But if you really want to go for everything, that's the full manual mode where you can control and play with all the three aspects of the exposure triangle. Now, softwares, there are many softwares. There's Adobe Lightroom, which is paid, but there are other free softwares that are available that you should be able to find on the internet and use them. But this particular one is from Sony. It's a free software, but it only works with Sony cameras. And what you're looking at here is a live Nikon has an Nikon Capture. I think Canon should have its own software for image capture and review. So there should be something from the camera manufacturer that should come for free.
Great, thank you so much. Shilpa asked, will the recording be shared? Yes, Shilpa, the recording will be shared for all sessions in the WhatsApp group. We were expecting a lot more people today. Somehow, I think because it's holiday season, we've got a few less people and they're being a little lazy. Sridhar, I would like you to wrap up and maybe, actually, before that, Praveen, maybe you can talk about session 2B that is coming up.
Yeah, so in session 2B, we'll be following a similar format, but we'll focus more on the shutter speed and ISO, and we'll try to wrap up the exposure triangle.
Awesome.
That's the plan for session 2B.
I'd invite you to speak a little bit about IIT MA and any wrap up that you would like to.
Thank you, Rohan. And thank you, Praveen. Excellent to understand the science behind the aperture, the amount of opening, the amount of light that gets in, and what it actually does to your image, right? So understanding is what really we are understanding, and learning, right? So is what we are understanding from these kind of sessions, and we can take that and use in playing around like Praveen did, right? He played around with a series of images to see what the differences were, and then he chose a couple of pictures that he liked to his eye, and he picked those as the final image. So when we look at aperture, as you know, we realized is a very important setting in the camera, and how aperture changes affects the image to a great extent, and understanding what we want from the image, right? So, for example, am I photographing a large group of people? And if I have a very small aperture, then everyone will be in focus, but also the background. But if I have a large aperture, maybe the people only in the center may be in focus, and the people, if they are in the end and if they are not standing in a perfect line, they could be out of focus. So understanding these applications is very important in getting that final image to be good, right? See, because ultimately you take it in the camera, and the camera, it looks kind of okay, but then when you go in and play around with the zoom, and that person who is on the edge, he or she will zoom in and will say that, look, I am completely blurred, right? And then he will like complain about the photograph. That is what, as a photographer, you have to understand when to use what. And this was a great session on aperture and the uses of aperture in different situations. Thank you so much, Praveen. And we look forward to concluding the exposure triangle with session 2B. And coming up after that is I will talk a little bit about photography equipment, different kinds of cameras, different kinds of lenses, what essentially could go into a bag, into a photography bag. And I will use practical examples of what is in my bag. And I'll show you examples of what is coming up there. IIT Ma is heading into a very busy season of reunions. We have the 25th year reunion batch coming up, 2020, no, the 2000 batch. They are coming for their 25th year Silver Jubilee reunion. The 95th, 95 batch is coming for their 30th year. And we have 40 and 50 year reunions as well that is happening. And we have other reunions, interesting reunions, like we have a biotech reunion. So people who graduated just from the biotech department. We have a Sarayu hostel reunion. So people who have stayed in Sarayu hostel across years, right? They are getting together to celebrate. By the way, news, if you guys have not heard, Sarayu is going the Mandakini way, and that also is coming down. And we're going to get a new Sarayu very soon. So, looking forward to more sessions on photography. I want all of you guys to tune in to the sessions coming up and look for messages from IIT Ma regarding events in your locality and participate. That is all we ask for. That is all we want. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Sridhar. I just want to add, apart from the reunions, we have some other exciting events. We have Holiday Connects events happening across the globe, whether you're in Paris on December 9th. They have a bowling event. If you're in Amravati or in Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, we have a chapter launch happening there. In Mumbai, we have a Nature Connect. In Bengaluru, we have another event on December 14th. In Delhi NCR on December 14th as well. Kochi also December 14th. Most exciting for me and Sridhar is the ISRO launch that is scheduled for December 15th. If you're in Chennai on the Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh region, and you can make it to Sriharikota, do register. And then, of course, we have all our reunions. And then next year, we're going to be bringing you a lot more events. So thank you, everyone, for joining so much. Thank you, Praveen. Thank you, Sridhar. And Sam is also here on this call, our first instructor. Um, so I really appreciate you all taking the time. I know it's a Saturday, it's a holiday season, and we had less crowd than we were expecting, but thank you so much.